Welcome to Satori Sounds, the podcast that invites you to unwind, relax, and explore the deeper currents of life. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the idea of negative self-talk, how being negative or critical of yourself in your mind can shape your experiences and views of yourself, others, and the world around you. We also discuss some tools that might be able to help you cope with some of these things. Thanks for joining us.
I have definitely experienced a number of times, especially when I was younger, almost calling myself out and being like, "Oh, you idiot. Like, well done, you've mucked that up again." And it took me a long while to realise how damaging that kind of thought can be, and actually the longer term effects of that self reinforcement. And I love that the inverse of that is also true, right? And we've talked about thoughts in our previous episode of how those thoughts can change your life for the good. But I think keeping on that negative self talk, right, of that criticism to yourself. It's, I think, probably the way I'd close that little paragraph is that a little quote that I saw on my mum's wall in her massage room when I was younger. And a lot of my home friends would probably remember this. She had 3 banners hanging up, but one of them said that if we realised how powerful our thoughts were, we'd never think a negative thought. I'll have to quote who that is down below, but I think negative self-talk...
You just made it up, don't lie.
Ollie Hardwick, 2024.
Pushing your own content, I knew it.
I know. That day might come, but we were a long way from that. And that's not negative self-talk. That's just a realisation that we're on a journey. But I think all I wanted to say to that was that I don't think people always understand how impactful negative self-talk can be on yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's a really poignant place to bring this episode, because how we talk to ourselves does impact our self-confidence. It does impact, and this is a really fancy word, but self-efficacy. So that's our belief in our ability to do things. So, you might, let's imagine, you might not apply for that job because you genuinely believe you're the worst person on earth. You might, not go for that Sunday walk because you don't believe you deserve it. You might punish yourself, and unjustly so. And I suppose what we're trying to say to people is notice when you're being negative to yourself, because the impact of that has real world ramifications. And it prevents you in many ways from living a life that you want to live.
Definitely. What I'm hearing there is that you could really impact not just your well-being, right, but your self-esteem of that, and living the life that you want to live. You can limit your new experiences, and you framed 2 really good examples there. One, it could just be your job. I can think of a number of colleagues that I've had conversations with, or even someone I saw on LinkedIn post the other day, where actually somebody who deservedly should have moved up a long time ago hadn't, because of their own self-doubt. And actually, when they went forward, it was almost like complete open arms, because everyone knew they were already ready, but they hadn't quite had the belief in themselves. And you can really limit yourself in that sense, right? I think you can talk yourself down and keep yourself very closed. And I've definitely suffered that in the past, as I started, this episode with. But I therefore now try and do the opposite of trying to keep my mind very open to opportunity. It doesn't mean I don't have that self-talk, right? But I do love that the opposite is also true, right? And that positive thoughts can impact you as well. Have you got any experiences around your own potentially negative self-talk, or maybe you're too perfect for that?
Honestly, you could fill a book with a negative self-talk I have on it. Sure. Maybe a trilogy.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure we could all film more than a book.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things we always have to remember is that these ideas... Am I too perfect for that? I just registered that. You cheeky bugger. I am pretty perfect, though, listeners.
It's what was it? Was it episode... I can't remember which episode it was now.
I think it was like episode 2.
But you know what I'm going with that, don't you?
So if you want to know the in-joke there, you need to go back and listen to the other episode. Right? But... stepping away from the humour, because we're a very serious podcast, very serious men.
Get your maintenance cycle out.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because actually that does kind of relate to what I was going to say. The maintenance cycle relates to the now, but actually, if we were to go deeper, our negative self-talk begins much earlier. It can begin in our foundational years, and this isn't necessarily my view, and so don't take this as gospel. But CBT will argue that we develop core beliefs very early on in our lives. And they're beliefs about ourselves, beliefs about the world, so the environment, beliefs about other people. And they call it the cognitive triad. And off the back of this, we develop almost dysfunctional rules and assumptions for living. And they very much code our processing. So when something happens around us, an event, maybe a conversation, maybe something going right, something going wrong, maybe a little dance at the disco, whatever it is, we start to shade that event, that picture of that event with our own internal processing, which is ultimately shaped by those early life experiences.
Interesting. So we're shaded. It shades it. That's a really actually. Sorry, I was just picturing that because it's almost like a lens. I think about it from a photography perspective of how you can put different lenses over a camera and it changes the whole scenery. But I think that's exactly what you're saying. There is that our own experiences is distort reality a too strong a term?
I think that's a really good term because often, how often have you heard the expression? There's 3 versions of the truth. There's your version. There's everyone else's version, and then there's kind of what happened. And we've all got that internal processing. No one's immune to it. And that's what heuristics, cognitive biases, all of these things, they're like little mental shortcuts that we have. And they're designed to get us in and out of danger, but sometimes they can also lead to these little pitfalls like that negative self-talk. So like as I stumbled there, I had a moment of negative self-talk. I thought, oh, you fool. People are going to bully you on the internet now because you look so foolish. But again, it's that balance. If I was to really sit there and challenge it and engage with it in a different way, I would see that's just a negative form of self-talk.
Yeah. I just listened to what you're saying there, right? And almost showing yourself some sympathy in a sense of like actually you're just acknowledging that you had that bad thought, but actually, almost trying to reframe it. And I was thinking about that for others, right? Because you talked about those 3 versions of the truth and other people's views and things. And I can imagine we can all probably relate to having a conversation or, a friend or a loved one who, you almost want to pick them up and shake him and say, you're listening to what you're saying to yourself there because it could be such a negative self-talk, right? And what I was thinking there is there's probably what's the right word for it? There's how can we show compassion, right? I think to other people when they've got that negative self-talk. In your mind, what are some of your ways that you think we can, if someone else is showing that negative self-talk, how can we show some compassion to them to kind of help give them that sympathy and help them overcome their own concerns?
I think there's lots of ways. Was that a question specifically for me or like a general question?
I think I was questioning to myself my own thought pattern, but it probably was a leading question for you to come in as well.
Yeah, and I really like the fact that you've used the word compassion because I suppose when we say that, we often conflate compassion with a feeling. I felt compassionate. But compassion is actually an action word. It's a doing word.
Hold on, say that again.
Compassion is an action word. It's a doing word. So empathy, you feel empathy. Compassion isn't quite empathy. Compassion is more than that. Compassion is noticing distress and suffering. So you have to notice that it's going on. And then the second part is being motivated to do something about it. Motivated to make the change, realistically. That's what compassion is. And so we can be compassionate to others because it can go multiple ways, but you can also be compassionate to yourself. And when you start to notice those thoughts, you're an idiot, you're a fool. Like me in that moment where I stumbled over my words and I'm, talking to myself like I'm an idiot. It's how we soothe ourselves. Or like that conversation that we had in episode 4 where you said, I thought the recording sounded really rubbish. And I was like, dude, I thought you sounded great. That's a good example of a negative self-thought. And it's how we come round to show ourselves compassion and begin to soothe ourselves internally. And there's a few ways we can do that, but I just wonder, how does that land with you and your question?
I think it's a really good one. The analogy that you said there for me from the previous episode was very much to that. I think, the bit that jumped out straight away from me there was that, you first of all, you made me feel heard in that instance, right? When I thought my audio was poor, you named it for me to say, well, actually, no, I didn't think it was, right? So you'd listened and you turned it around, but you said it without judgment, right? And you said it in a kind way. And I think, well, to me anyway, that's, I think, where compassion can kind of come from, is first of all, making someone feel heard in that particular moment, speaking to them in that kind of kind way. The reason I'm pausing there is my logical brain immediately comes in and goes, well, we need to then solve it. But actually, sometimes you should just listen without that judgment, and then maybe offer them some help, right? If they want it, but not just because that. I've definitely had some negative self-talks with myself where I have I've offered it without actually seeing if the individual wanted it, and it was like afterwards, like, oh, that hasn't helped the situation. But my logical brain jumps in and it's like, oh, we can solve it by doing this.
Yeah, I think that's a really poignant point, because actually sometimes if you jump in and immediately go to problem solving, the person feels really invalidated. That actually, oh, look, it was this easy all along, and it can reinforce that negative self-talk. So if they think they're stupid, and you go, well, why do you think you're stupid? And they go, oh, I keep getting this thing wrong. And you come in, you do it straight away. They're like, look, see, I am stupid. And that experience is just shaded. Again, it's reinforced. And, as I said, coming back to our photography analogy, or kind of our picture analogy, life is like a picture. Our processing then adds the color and the shading. And we have to be a bit of an artist and be like, do we really want that shading here? Actually, I'm using that I'm an idiot paint to paint this tree. But am I really an idiot? Should I be using more of that Bob Ross I'm great blue? Do you know what I mean? For the flowers on this tree?
Yeah, no, I'm very, very visual, very vivid. So that's that's very landing with me, right? And I think what I was taking from that, I was flicking through all the different filters and lenses, right, is that, we are what we think in many ways, whether that is positive or negative. And I think I'm really trying not to use a certain word, which you'll laugh at when you hear what I'm about to say, right? But I think you have to.
I already know what it is.
I'm not going to say it because I've said it every episode.
Say it. You got to do it. Don't break the streak.
You just have to notice when you're having negative thoughts.
God's sake, just say the word.
What? And the word was?
I'm not going to say it. You have to say it. That's the thing.
I don't know this word.
It is your word. You have to say it.
We have to be aware of it, right? You have to be aware of having those negative thoughts, right?
Oh, there it is.
And then I think we can kind of challenge it or replace it sometimes, right? So you've talked about those different filters, right? So we almost need to seek that evidence of this, not actually disproving, right, but reframing that negative thought, right? Is the right shade being cast over it? Was it already agitated? I'm giving myself this negative thought, or is actually just in the moment, was that a step up, right? If we go back to the other episode and you talking to me, you raising the point about me with feeling the audio in episode 3, right? Actually, I could have come about it from a negative self-talk and just been like, my audio is terrible on everything, right? But what I was able to do is actually look for the evidence and be like, well, actually, it was just that episode, in my opinion. I know you had a different opinion on it, but actually, we can, once we've got that, we were noticing noticing it, we need to almost look for that evidence, right? That can sometimes help us reframe that negative thought.
I suppose the evidence for me listening to that episode wasn't that the mic quality was awful. It was that the content that you were saying was so engaging, and it just sounds like I'm doing this to placate you, but I'm not. It's a genuine. He just pulled a funny face on the microphone, ladies and gentlemen. That's why my sentence stifled there. But it was a genuine interesting what you were saying, that I didn't care about the microphone content. And I suppose that's the piece of evidence that I use to substantiate that position. But we've spoken a lot about kind of like a CBT reframing there. And one of the things I suppose we did in the last episode was speak a little bit about kind of acceptance. I suppose today I maybe want to speak a little bit about self-soothing, and actually, instead of reframing that thought in the sense of being like, oh yeah, we're going to challenge it, we're going to look for evidence, and instead of accepting, just letting the thought be there, one of the things that we tend to learn this skill in childhood and grow up, if we've had particularly challenging experiences or difficult experiences, critical or maybe emotionally withholding circumstances, you name it, maybe kind of experiences that have really harmed us psychologically in some ways, we don't necessarily learn to soothe ourselves in our head. I suppose one of the things that I think about, and I practice a lot, is if I make a mistake, it's what would the people I care about say to me? I think about, what would you say to me? You'd probably be like, all right, buddy, it's not so bad. Or I think about, what my partner would say to me. She'd be like, yeah, you made a mistake, but these things happen. It's okay. And it's taking that content, using that to soothe yourself and being like, actually, I'm not so bad. People, care about me. And this is how we begin to soothe.
That makes sense. So am I hearing that almost the first thing that we could do around that soothing is, first of all, being gentle with ourselves?
I think so, yeah. Because actually what you'll tend to find is, for a lot of people, and I can say this from a personal experience, that critical bullying thoughts that we have, because we've practiced them lots, they're very automatic and they're very strong. And so we have to work for a little while to build up the good things about ourselves. That's what compassion diaries are. They're for practicing that, identifying.
Oh, come on, Josh. Compassion diaries. Sorry, you hooked us there. You're going to have to explain that one. No, not you're bad at all. People are going to want to know what those are. You can't drop something like that and then just skim over it.
I'm giving away all my good stuff, though. That's the problem. I suppose a compassion diary is the practice of identifying good things about yourself every day. It doesn't have to be grandiose, it doesn't have to be extreme. But it could just be like, actually, you know what? When I was walking the dog, I was really kind to him and I was good that day. Or when I made that meal, it was a good meal. I made that, something I'm proud of. And I suppose it's working through those negative thoughts by also offering some good thoughts good things that you do, that you are more than that belief that you're useless. You're more than that belief that you're silly or you're stupid.
I love that. So what you're saying is, think about things that like you're grateful for, that you've done well, right? And practicing positive self-talk instead of negative self-talk. Yeah. In a way. I love that. That's really good. The other bit, actually, you just jumping back out, because that was a really good thing to dive into. You were talking about your friends and your partner, right? But I actually think that's a really good it's a really good way to look at it, right? Not saying anything to yourself that you wouldn't say to others. I can definitely vouch for this, and I've done this. I've, said some stuff to myself that I wouldn't dream of saying out loud to anyone else. Right?
Says them to me all the time.
off mic. These are personal.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know what I mean, right? I think we can all resonate with that. There is some stuff that has gone through all of our heads, right? Where if you listen to that as an observer and you saw someone else speaking to someone else like that, you would definitely be like, "Oh, hold on a second, Mike. Is everything okay? Like, what's going on here?" Right? You wouldn't be as accepting. And so, actually, what you did there, where you were saying, actually, I look at it from, what my partner or my friends would say is, yeah, don't say anything to yourself that you wouldn't say to anyone else. Well, that's my take from that, anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way of putting it. That's really consumable, and I'm going to say that Paul Gilbert came up with this, but I could be wrong. Don't come after me if I do. Yeah,
the show notes will speak for you.
They will. But I suppose in compassion-focused therapy and Paul Gilbert's model, they talk about an exercise called the compassionate other, and I suppose it's that. What would the ideal compassionate person begin to say to you? How would you soothe yourself? And what would they do to soothe you? And what would you do to soothe another person? If someone else had made that mistake, what would you do and say to them? And there's a really, really interesting exercise that you can watch on YouTube. I can't remember the bloke's name, but I'll tell it to you, and then I'll just say this is the title. Imagine you're on a beach and you're walking, and it's a sunny day, it's hot. And you think, oh, bloody hell, that's hot. I'm sweating buckets. And you notice that there's a lump in the sand, big lump, huge. And you get closer and closer, and you see the lumps moving, and you can hear it kind of crying and wheezing a little bit. And you get closer, and you see that it's a turtle, and it's all caught up in a net. So tight, it's bound up tight, can't do anything. And now, if you were on that beach, what sort of things would you do and say to that turtle?
Is that a question for me, or is that
it's a reflective question in general? And you can answer it if you'd like, but it's a reflective question, I suppose.
I almost don't want to answer it, to leave it for the listeners to explore themselves. I think we can have that conversation offline as to what maybe we would say specifically. I do think being compassionate does take practice. It's not something we're automatically born with in a way, are we?
It's so strange because, yeah, it does. I suppose it does. A bit like all those other things, we have to learn how to do them. It's like talking. No one's necessarily born instantly being able to talk. They have to learn, and you have to be shown how to be compassionate. And I suppose it's engaging with that new scary thing that might feel really horrible at first, might feel really gross because you're so unused to it, or you're so kind of, particularly in regards to yourself, and it might feel really hard, but it's persevering to do that because realistically, in our day-to-day problems, we're no different to that turtle getting caught up in the net, struggling, fighting against it. And other people might come around and soothe that turtle. And it's thinking about, when we're bound up in that situation, what do we need? How do we soothe ourselves?
That makes sense. And I think listening to that, the way that I've tried to not get too bound up or listening to my own self-talk is getting my thoughts down on paper, because actually I think we've both mentioned journaling quite a lot, and it's definitely not the answer for everything, right? You've talked about from a compassionate diary perspective, but for me personally, a journaling of catching myself in the morning, right? Actually, I've woken up irritated. I know today's going to be a more difficult day, right? Now I can sit there and just be like, oh, it's all going to be a horrible day and everything's going to go wrong and all that. But I'm like, actually, dude, yeah, you're annoyed. Just watch yourself today, And also at the end of the day, right? Just getting my thoughts down to improve my own negative thinking. Maybe I can reflect on the situation. The negative self-talk and soothing. The soothing bit's a really interesting one, right? Because I can definitely say with confidence that when I worked through my own negative self-talk, I wasn't very soothing. I think if I'd had some of those tools, it would have been a lot better. For me, journaling, forcing myself to think positively, reframing has all helped in some ways. And there's been some models there. Are there any other examples that you personally have found useful for negative?
I just recognised something you were saying in that moment when you were saying, oh, I wish I had some of those tools before. And it's the same thing. I wish I had that before. But actually, in a bizarre way, that is almost a negative comment. Like, oh, if only I'd had this before. We can't change the past, but we're here now, and that's the point. We're getting these tools now. We have these tools to use now. So we can't blame ourselves for not being able to do certain things at different points in our life, because they're skills we're learning.
100%. They're all chuckling, right? You just flagged a really good level of subconscious criticism that I hadn't even picked up, right? I just automatically gone into that.
Shows how easy it is to do, though, doesn't it? So well rehearsed, and it's a bit like our processing. Someone says something a certain way, we process it one way, or we process it another, and our minds just fly. They're automatic. They don't stop to catch everything. They just go. Self-talk's the same.
Yeah, that does make sense. So go back to my question. Are there any other kind of tools that you maybe we talked a bit about modeling and I talked about my examples, but are there anything, maybe it's not models, maybe it's just something you've done, anything else that you've used to help combat negative self-talk?
Yeah, I suppose the big one I tend to use really is around breathing. I think it usually depends how I'm physically feeling at that moment. Obviously, we have different ways of understanding this, but for me, and this is a completely personal example, am I physically feeling my emotions? So am I feeling cross? Am I feeling anxious? Or worried, I should say? Am I feeling sad? And if I'm kind of wrapped up in that emotional state, then I might do different things like breathing. I might just stress tolerance skills. I might, I suppose, just, divert my attention, try and engage with something else, use some of that energy in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a more cognitive example, I might do leaves on a stream thing. So if I'm ruminating about it rather, and I might, I suppose, do the journaling. And it just depends on my mood at the time and depends how it's impacting me. And I suppose when we give this advice, we're talking about stuff that works for us and stuff that we've seen work elsewhere and kind of what models say. But as a listener, you realistically, we're giving you the concepts, but you'll have to work out what works for you as an individual. And it takes practice as well.
It's it's not something you do once and nail, is it? Right? I think that really, in my mind, wraps it to a point of summarizing really well. So I think we have to understand our own negative self-talk and maybe others, right? And different tools that work for different people. I really liked your word that you used around compassion as action. That is an action word. I think that's actually something people can look a bit more and progress with. The awareness.
Oh yeah, we've got it 2 times in an episode. Gosh, I'm going to drink again.
Yeah, the awareness of the negative thoughts, right? But also your power of your own thoughts, right? Understanding how powerful they are. Is there anything else you'd add to summarize?
I'd probably just add in that, I do think soothing is a really important skill because we do talk a lot about kind of what you can control and that, your thoughts are one of them, but sometimes life will deal you a bum hand and that sucks. And it's going to agitate you. It's going to make you cross. It's going to make you sad. It's going to make you ball up your fists in rage or feel sad and upset. But in that moment, you have to equip yourself with some skills to ride out that storm and soothe yourself to help you kind of down-regulate because these are heightened states.
I loved what you said about equipping yourself with some tools because I think actually that encapsulates, right, we've talked about intentionality and awareness, doing the other things, right, but actually what we're learning for ourselves and hopefully other people are starting to benefit from is building our own little toolbox of tools to help navigate all these kind of experiences in life. And I just thought it was a really good, vivid ways to kind of frame that.
To summarize, how you talk to yourself is important. It can shape your view of yourself and your belief in your ability to do things. And there will be times where you can challenge some of those thoughts. And maybe times that you feel less able to do so. So in those moments, one of the things we spoke about doing was learning to soothe yourself and to be compassionate to yourself and others. Thanks for listening.